Section 6. The strange thing on looking back was the purity, the integrity of her feeling for Sally. It was not like one's feeling for a man. It was completely disinterested, and besides, it had a quality which could only exist between women just grown up. It was protective on her side, sprang from a sense of being in league together, a presentiment of something that was bound to part them. They spoke of marriage always as a catastrophe, which led to this chivalry, this protective feeling which was much more on her side than Sally's. For in those days she was completely reckless, did the most idiotic things out of bravado, bicycled round the parapet on the terrace, smoked cigars. Absurd she was, very absurd. But the charm was overpowering, to her at least, so that she could remember standing in her bedroom at the top of the house, holding the hot water can in her hands and saying aloud, "She is beneath this roof! She is beneath this roof!" No, the words meant absolutely nothing to her now. She could not even get an echo of her old emotion. But she could remember going cold with excitement, and doing her hair in a kind of ecstasy. Now the old feelings began to come back to her as she took out her hairpins, laid them on the dressing table, began to do her hair. With the rooks flaunting up and down in the pink evening light, and dressing, and going downstairs, and feeling as she crossed the hall, if it were now to die, 'twere now to be most happy. That was her feeling, Othello's feeling, and she felt it, she was convinced, as strongly as Shakespeare meant Othello to feel it, all because she was coming down to dinner in a white frock to meet Sally Seton. She was wearing pink gauze. Was that possible? She seemed, anyhow, all light, glowing, like some bird or air ball that has flown in, attached itself for a moment to a bramble. But nothing is so strange when one is in love. And what was this except being in love? As the complete indifference of other people. Aunt Helena just wandered off after dinner. Papa read the paper. Peter Walsh might have been there, and old Miss Cummings. Joseph Bretkoff certainly was, for he came every summer, poor old man, for weeks and weeks, and pretended to read German with her, but really played the piano and sang Brahms without any voice. All this was only a background for Sally. She stood by the fireplace talking in that beautiful voice which made everything she said sound like a caress, to Papa, who had begun to be attracted rather against his will. He never got over lending her one of his books and finding it soaked on the terrace. When suddenly she said, "What a shame to sit indoors!" and they all went out onto the terrace and walked up and down. Peter Walsh and Joseph Bretkoff went on about Wagner. She and Sally fell a little behind. Then came the most exquisite moment of her whole life, passing a stone urn with flowers in it. Sally stopped, picked a flower, kissed her on the lips. The whole world might have turned upside down. The others disappeared. There she was, alone with Sally. And she felt that she had been given a present, wrapped up and told just to keep it, not to look at it. A diamond, something infinitely precious, wrapped up, which, as they walked up and down, she uncovered, or the radiance burnt through, the revelation, the religious feeling, when old Joseph and Peter faced them. "Stargazing?" said Peter. It was like running one's face against a granite wall in the darkness. It was shocking. It was horrible. Not for herself. She felt only how Sally was being mauled already, maltreated. She felt his hostility, his jealousy, his determination to break into their companionship. All this she saw as one sees a landscape in a flash of lightning. And Sally, never had she admired her so much, gallantly taking her away unvanquished. She laughed. She made old Joseph tell her the names of the stars, which he liked doing very seriously. She stood there. She listened. She heard the names of the stars. Oh, this horror, she said to herself, as if she had known all along that something would interrupt, would embitter her moment of happiness. Yet, after all, how much she owed to him later. Always when she thought of him, she thought of their quarrels for some reason, because she wanted his good opinion so much, perhaps. She owed him words. Sentimental, civilized. They started up every day of her life as if he guarded her. A book was sentimental, an attitude to life sentimental. Sentimental, perhaps, she was to be thinking of the past. What would he think, she wondered, when he came back? That she had grown older? Would he say that? Or would she see him thinking when he came back that she had grown older? It was true. Since her illness she had turned almost white. Laying her brooch on the table, she had a sudden spasm, as if, while she mused, the icy claws had had the chance to fix in her. She was not old yet. She had just broken into her 52nd year. Months and months of it were still untouched. June, July, August. Each still remained almost whole, and, as if to catch the falling drop, Clarissa, crossing to the dressing-table, plunged into the very heart of the moment, transfixed it there. The moment of this June morning on which was the pressure of all the other mornings, seeing the glass, the dressing-table, and all the bottles afresh, collecting the whole of her at one point, as she looked into the glass, seeing the delicate pink face of the woman who was that very night to give a party, of Clarissa Dalloway, of herself. How many million times had she seen her face, and always with the same imperceptible contraction. She pursed her lips when she looked in the glass. It was to give her face point. That was herself, pointed, dart-like, definite. That was herself when some effort, some call on her to be herself, drew the parts together. She alone knew how different, how incompatible and composed so for the world only into one centre, one diamond, one woman who sat in her drawing-room and made a meeting point. A radiancy, no doubt, in some dull lives, a refuge for the lonely to come to, perhaps. She had helped young people who were grateful to her, had tried to be the same always, never showing a sign of all the other sides of her, faults, jealousies, vanities, suspicions, like this of Lady Bruton not asking her to lunch, which, she thought, combing her hair finally, is utterly base. Now where was her dress? Her evening dresses hung in the cupboard. Clarissa, plunging her hand into the softness, gently detached the green dress and carried it to the window. She had torn it. Someone had trod on the skirt. She had felt it give at the embassy party at the top among the folds. By artificial light the green shone, but lost its colour now in the sun. She would mend it. Her maids had too much to do. She would wear it tonight. She would take her silks, her scissors, what was it? Her thimble, of course, down into the drawing-room, for she must also write, and see that things generally were more or less in order. Strange, she thought, pausing on the landing and assembling that diamond shape, that single person. Strange how a mistress knows the very moment, the very temper of her house. Faint sounds rose in spirals up the well of the stairs, the swish of a mop, tapping, knocking, a loudness when the front door opened, a voice repeating a message in the basement, the chink of silver on a tray, clean silver for the party. All was for the party. And Lucy, coming into the drawing-room with her tray held out, put the giant candlesticks on the mantelpiece, the silver casket in the middle, turned the crystal dolphin towards the clock. They would come. They would stand. They would talk in the mincing tones which she could imitate. Ladies and gentlemen. Of all, her mistress was loveliest. Mistress of silver, of linen, of china, for the sun, the silver, doors off their hinges, Rumpelmayer's men, gave her a sense, as she laid the paper knife on the inlaid table, of something achieved. "Behold! Behold!" she said, speaking to her old friends in the baker's shop, where she had first seen service at Caterham, prying into the glass. She was Lady Angela, attending Princess Mary, when in came Mrs. Dalloway. "Oh, Lucy," she said, "the silver does look nice." "And how," she said, turning the crystal dolphin to stand straight, "how did you enjoy the play last night?" "Oh, they had to go before the end," she said. "They had to be back at 10, she said. "So they don't know what happened," she said. "That does seem hard luck," she said, for her servant stayed later if they asked her. "That does seem rather a shame," she said, taking the old bald-looking cushion in the middle of the sofa and putting it in Lucy's arms, and giving her a little push, and crying, "Take it away! Give it to Mrs. Walker with my compliments. Take it away!" she cried. And Lucy stopped at the drawing-room door, holding the cushion, and said, very shyly, turning a little pink, couldn't she help to mend that dress? But, said Mrs. Dalloway, she had enough on her hands already, quite enough of her own to do without that. But thank you, Lucy, oh, thank you, said Mrs. Dalloway, and thank you, she went on saying, sitting down on the sofa with her dress over her knees, her scissors, her silks. Thank you, she went on saying in gratitude to her servants generally for helping her to be like this, to be what she wanted, gentle, generous-hearted. Her servants liked her. And then this dress of hers, where was the tear? And now her needle to be threaded. This was a favourite dress, one of Sally Parker's, the last almost she ever made, alas, for Sally had now retired, living at Ealing, and if ever I have a moment, thought Clarissa, but never would she have a moment any more, I shall go and see her at Ealing, for she was a character, thought Clarissa, a real artist. She thought of little out-of-the-way things, yet her dresses were never queer. You could wear them at Hatfield, at Buckingham Palace. She had worn them at Hatfield, at Buckingham Palace. Quiet descended on her, calm, content, as her needle, drawing the silk smoothly to its gentle pores, collected the green folds together and attached them, very lightly, to the belt. So, on a summer's day, waves overbalance and fall, collect and fall, and the whole world seems to be saying, that is all, more and more ponderously, until even the heart in the body which lies in the sun on the beach says too, that is all. Fear no more, says the heart. Fear no more, says the heart, committing its burden to some sea, which sighs collectively for all sorrows, and renews, begins, collects, lets fall, and the body alone listens to the passing bee, the wave breaking, the dog barking, far away barking and barking. Section 7 of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 7. Heavens, the front door bell! Exclaimed Clarissa, staying her needle. Roused, she listened. Mrs. Dalloway will see me, said the elderly man in the hall. Oh, yes, she will see me, he repeated, putting Lucy aside very benevolently and running upstairs ever so quickly. Yes, he muttered as he ran upstairs. She will see me. After 5 years in India, Clarissa will see me. What can, asked Mrs. Dalloway, thinking it was outrageous to be interrupted at 11 o'clock on the morning of the day she was giving a party, hearing a step on the stairs. She heard a hand upon the door. She made to hide her dress like a virgin protecting chastity, respecting privacy. Now the brass knob slipped. Now the door opened, and in came, for a single second she could not remember what he was called. So surprised she was to see him, so glad, so shy, so utterly taken aback to have Peter Walsh come to her unexpectedly in the morning. She had not read his letter. And how are you? Said Peter Walsh, positively trembling, taking both her hands, kissing both her hands. She's grown older, he thought, sitting down. I shan't tell her anything about it, he thought, for she's grown older. She's looking at me, he thought, a sudden embarrassment coming over him, though he had kissed her hands. Putting his hand into his pocket, he took out a large pocket-knife and half opened the blade. Exactly the same, thought Clarissa. The same queer look, the same check suit. A little out of the straight his face is, a little thinner, drier perhaps, but he looks awfully well, and just the same. How heavenly it is to see you again, she exclaimed. He had his knife out. That's so like him, she thought. He had only reached town last night, he said. Would have to go down into the country at once. And how was everything? How was everybody? Richard? Elizabeth? And what's all this? He said, tilting his penknife towards her green dress. He's very well dressed, thought Clarissa, yet he always criticizes me. Here she is mending her dress as usual, he thought. Here she's been sitting all the time I've been in India, mending her dress, playing about, going to parties, running to the house and back, and all that, he thought, growing more and more irritated, more and more agitated. For there's nothing in the world so bad for some women as marriage, he thought, and politics, and having a conservative husband like the admirable Richard. So it is, he thought, shutting his knife with a snap. Richard's very well. Richard's at a committee, said Clarissa, and she opened her scissors and said, did he mind her just finishing what she was doing to her dress, for they had a party that night. Which I shan't ask you to, she said. My dear Peter, she said. But it was delicious to hear her say that. My dear Peter. Indeed, it was all so delicious. The silver, the chairs, all so delicious. Why wouldn't she ask him to her party, he asked. Now, of course, thought Clarissa, he's enchanting, perfectly enchanting. Now I remember how impossible it was ever to make up my mind, and why did I make up my mind not to marry him, she wondered, that awful summer. But it's so extraordinary that you should have come this morning, she cried, putting her hands one on top of another, down on her dress. Do you remember, she said, how the blinds used to flap at Burton? They did, he said. And he remembered breakfasting alone very awkwardly with her father, who had died, and he had not written to Clarissa. But he had never got on well with old Parry, that querulous, weak-kneed old man, Clarissa's father, Justin Parry. I often wish I'd got on better with your father, he said. But he never liked anyone who... our friends, said Clarissa, and could have bitten her tongue for thus reminding Peter that he had wanted to marry her. Of course I did, thought Peter. It almost broke my heart, too, he thought, and was overcome with his own grief, which rose like a moon looked at from a terrace, ghastly beautiful with light from the sunken day. I was more unhappy than I've ever been since, he thought, and as if in truth he were sitting there on the terrace, he edged a little towards Clarissa, put his hand out, raised it, let it fall. There above them it hung, that moon. She too seemed to be sitting with him on the terrace in the moonlight. Herbert has it now, she said. I never go there now, she said. Then, just as happens on a terrace in the moonlight, when one person begins to feel ashamed that he is already bored, and yet as the other sits silent, very quiet, sadly looking at the moon, does not like to speak, moves his foot, clears his throat, notices some iron scroll on a table leg, stirs a leaf, but says nothing, so Peter Walsh did now. For why go back like this to the past, he thought. Why make him think of it again? Why make him suffer when she had tortured him so infernally? Why? Do you remember the lake? She said, in an abrupt voice, under the pressure of an emotion which caught her heart, made the muscles of her throat stiff, and contracted her lips in a spasm as she said, lake. For she was a child, throwing bread to the ducks between her parents, and at the same time a grown woman coming to her parents who stood by the lake, holding her life in her arms, which, as she neared them, grew larger and larger in her arms, until it became a whole life, a complete life, which she put down by them and said, "This is what I have made of it. This." And what had she made of it? What indeed, sitting there sewing this morning with Peter? She looked at Peter Walsh. Her look, passing through all that time and that emotion, reached him doubtfully, settled on him tearfully, and rose and fluttered away, as a bird touches a branch and rises and flutters away. Quite simply, she wiped her eyes. Yes, said Peter. Yes, 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 he said, as if she drew up to the surface something which positively hurt him as it rose. Stop, stop, he wanted to cry. For he was not old, his life was not over, not by any means. He was only just past 50. Shall I tell her, he thought, or not? He would like to make a clean breast of it all. But she is too cold, he thought, sewing with her scissors. Daisy would look ordinary beside Clarissa, and she would think me a failure, which I am in their sense, he thought, in the Dalloways' sense. Oh yes, he had no doubt about that. He was a failure compared with all this, the inlaid table, the mounted paper knife, the dolphin and the candlesticks, the chair covers and the old valuable English tinted prints. He was a failure. I detest the smugness of the whole affair, he thought. Richard's doing, not Clarissa's, save that she married him. Here Lucy came into the room, carrying silver, more silver, but charming, slender, graceful she looked, he thought, as she stooped to put it down. And this has been going on all the time, he thought, week after week, Clarissa's life, while he thought, and at once everything seemed to radiate from him, journeys, rides, quarrels, adventures, bridge parties, love affairs, work, work, work. And he took out his knife quite openly, his old horn-handled knife which Clarissa could swear he had had these 30 years, and clenched his fist upon it. What an extraordinary habit that was, Clarissa thought, always playing with a knife. always making one feel, too, frivolous, empty-minded, a mere silly chatterbox, as he used. But I, too, she thought, and taking up her needle, summoned, like a queen whose guards have fallen asleep and left her unprotected. She had been quite taken aback by this visit. It had upset her. So that anyone can stroll in and have a look at her where she lies with the brambles curving over her, summoned to her help the things she did, the things she liked, her husband, Elizabeth, herself, in short, which Peter hardly knew now, all to come about her and beat off the enemy. "Well, and what's happened to you?" she said. So before a battle begins, the horses paw the ground, toss their heads, the light shines on their flanks, their necks curve. So Peter Walsh and Clarissa, sitting side by side on the blue sofa, challenged each other. His powers chafed and tossed in him. He assembled from different quarters all sorts of things. Praise, his career at Oxford, his marriage, which she knew nothing whatever about, how he had loved and altogether done his job. "Millions of things!" he exclaimed, and urged by the assembly of powers which were now charging this way and that, and giving him the feeling at once frightening and extremely exhilarating of being rushed through the air on the shoulders of people he could no longer see, he raised his hands to his forehead. Clarissa sat very upright, drew in her breath. "I am in love," he said, not to her, however, but to someone raised up in the dark so that you could not touch her but must lay your garland down on the grass in the dark. "In love," he repeated, now speaking rather dryly to Clarissa Dalloway. "In love with a girl in India." He had deposited his garland. Clarissa could make what she would of it. "In love," she said. That he at his age should be sucked under in his little bow tie by that monster. And there's no flesh on his neck, his hands are red, and he's 6 months older than I am. Her eyes flashed back to her, but in her heart she felt, all the same, he is in love. He has that, she felt. He is in love. But the indomitable egotism which forever rides down the hosts opposed to it, the river which says on, even though, it admits, there may be no goal for us whatever, still on, this indomitable egotism charged her cheeks with colour, made her look very young, very pink, very bright-eyed as she sat with her dress upon her knee, and her needle held to the end of green silk, trembling a little. He was in love, not with her. With some younger woman, of course. "And who is she?" she asked. Now this statue must be brought from its height and set down between them. "A married woman, unfortunately," he said. "The wife of a major in the Indian Army." And with a curious, ironical sweetness, he smiled as he placed her in this ridiculous way before Clarissa. All the same, he is in love, thought Clarissa. "She has," he continued, very reasonably, "2 small children, a boy and a girl, and I have come over to see my lawyers about the divorce." There they are, he thought. Do what you like with them, Clarissa, there they are. And second by second it seemed to him that the wife of the major in the Indian Army, his Daisy, and her 2 small children became more and more lovely as Clarissa looked at them, as if he had set light to a grey pellet on a plate, and there had risen up a lovely tree in the brisk sea-salted air of their intimacy. For in some ways no one understood him, felt with him, as Clarissa did, their exquisite intimacy. She flattered him, she fooled him, thought Clarissa, shaping the woman, the wife of the major in the Indian Army, with 3 strokes of a knife. What a waste! What a folly! All his life long Peter had been fooled like that, first getting sent down from Oxford, next marrying the girl on the boat going out to India, now the wife of a major in the Indian Army. Thank heaven she had refused to marry him. Still, he was in love. Her old friend, her dear Peter. He was in love. Section 8. "But what are you going to do?" she asked him. "Oh, the lawyers and solicitors, Messrs. Hooper and Greatley of Lincoln's Inn, they were going to do it," he said, and he actually pared his nails with his pocket-knife. "For heaven's sake, leave your knife alone!" she cried to herself in irrepressible irritation. It was his silly unconventionality, his weakness, his lack of the ghost of a notion what anyone else was feeling that annoyed her, had always annoyed her. And now at his age, how silly! "I know all that," Peter thought. "I know what I'm up against," he thought, running his finger along the blade of his knife. Clarissa and Dalloway and all the rest of them, but I'll show Clarissa. And then, to his utter surprise, suddenly thrown by those uncontrollable forces thrown through the air, he burst into tears. Wept without the least shame, sitting on the sofa, the tears running down his cheeks. And Clarissa had leant forward, taken his hand, drawn him to her, kissed him, actually had felt his face on hers before she could down the brandishing of silver flashing, plumes like pampas grass in a tropic gale in her breast, which, subsiding, left her holding his hand, patting his knee, and feeling as she sat back extraordinarily at her ease with him and light-hearted. All in a clap it came over her. If I had married him, this gaiety would have been mine all day. It was all over for her. The sheet was stretched and the bed narrow. She had gone up into the tower alone and left them blackberrying in the sun. The door had shut, and there among the dust of fallen plaster and the litter of birds' nests, how distant the view had looked. And the sounds came thin and chill. Once on Leith Hill, she remembered. And Richard, Richard, she cried, as a sleeper in the night starts and stretches a hand in the dark for help. Lunching with Lady Bruton, it came back to her. He has left me. I am alone for ever, she thought, folding her hands upon her knee. Peter Walsh had got up and crossed to the window and stood with his back to her, flicking a bandana handkerchief from side to side. Masterly and dry and desolate he looked, his thin shoulder blades lifting his coat slightly, blowing his nose violently. Take me with you, Clarissa thought impulsively, as if he were starting directly upon some great voyage. And then, next moment, it was as if the 5 acts of a play that had been very exciting and moving were now over, and she had lived a lifetime in them, and had run away, had lived with Peter, and it was now over. Now it was time to move, and as a woman gathers her things together, her cloak, her gloves, her opera glasses, and gets up to go out of the theatre into the street, she rose from the sofa and went to Peter. And it was awfully strange, he thought, how she still had the power, as she came tinkling, rustling, still had the power as she came across the room to make the moon, which he detested, rise at Burton on the terrace in the summer sky. "Tell me," he said, seizing her by the shoulders, "are you happy, Clarissa? Does Richard—" The door opened. "Here is my Elizabeth," said Clarissa, emotionally, histrionically perhaps. "How do you do?" said Elizabeth, coming forward. The sound of Big Ben striking the half-hour struck out between them with extraordinary vigour, as if a young man, strong, indifferent, inconsiderate, were swinging dumb-bells this way and that. "Hullo, Elizabeth!" cried Peter, stuffing his handkerchief into his pocket, going quickly to her, saying "Good-bye, Clarissa," without looking at her, leaving the room quickly, and running downstairs and opening the hall door. "Peter! Peter!" cried Clarissa, following him out onto the landing. "My party tonight! Remember my party tonight!" she cried, having to raise her voice against the roar of the open air, and overwhelmed by the traffic and the sound of all the clocks striking, her voice crying, "Remember my party tonight!" sounded frail and thin and very far away as Peter Walsh shut the door. "Remember my party. Remember my party," said Peter Walsh as he stepped down the street, speaking to himself rhythmically, in time with the flow of the sound, the direct, downright sound of Big Ben striking the half-hour. The leaden circles dissolved in the air. Oh, these parties, he thought. Clarissa's parties. Why does she give these parties, he thought. Not that he blamed her, or this effigy of a man in a tailcoat with a carnation in his buttonhole coming towards him. Only one person in the world could be as he was, in love. And there he was, this fortunate man, himself, reflected in the plate-glass window of a motor-car manufacturer in Victoria Street. All India lay behind him, plains, mountains, epidemics of cholera, a district twice as big as Ireland, decisions he had come to alone. He, Peter Walsh, who was now, really for the first time in his life, in love. Clarissa had grown hard, he thought, and a trifle sentimental into the bargain, he suspected, looking at the great motor cars capable of doing how many miles on how many gallons? For he had a turn for mechanics, had invented a plough in his district, had ordered wheelbarrows from England, but the coolies wouldn't use them, all of which Clarissa knew nothing whatever about. The way she had said, Here is my Elizabeth. That annoyed him. Why not here's Elizabeth, simply? It was insincere, and Elizabeth didn't like it either. Still, the last tremors of the great booming voice shook the air round him. The half-hour, still early, only 11:30 still. For he understood young people, he liked them. There was always something cold in Clarissa, he thought. She had always, even as a girl, a sort of timidity, which in middle age becomes conventionality, and then it's all up, he thought, looking rather drearily into the glassy depths, and wondering whether, by calling at that hour, he had annoyed her, overcome with shame suddenly at having been a fool, wept, been emotional, told her everything as usual, as usual. As a cloud crosses the sun, silence falls on London, and falls on the mind. Effort ceases. Time flaps on the mast. There we stop. There we stand. Rigid, the skeleton of habit alone upholds the human frame. Where there is nothing, Peter Walsh said to himself, feeling hollowed out, utterly empty within. Clarissa refused me, he thought. He stood there thinking, Clarissa refused me. Ah, said St. Margaret, like a hostess who comes into her drawing-room on the very stroke of the hour and finds her guests there already. I am not late. No, it is precisely 11:30, she says. Yet, though she is perfectly right, her voice, being the voice of the hostess, is reluctant to inflict its individuality. Some grief for the past holds it back, some concern for the present. It is 11:30, she says, and the sound of St. Margaret's glides into the recesses of the heart and buries itself in ring after ring of sound, like something alive which wants to confide itself, to disperse itself, to be, with a tremor of delight, at rest. Like Clarissa herself, thought Peter Walsh, coming down the stairs on the stroke of the hour in white. It is Clarissa herself, he thought, with a deep emotion, and an extraordinarily clear yet puzzling recollection of her, as if this belle had come into the room years ago, where they sat at some moment of great intimacy, and had gone from one to the other and had left, like a bee with honey, laden with the moment. But what room? What moment? And why had he been so profoundly happy when the clock was striking? Then, as the sound of St. Margaret's languished, he thought, she has been ill, and the sound expressed languor and suffering. It was her heart, he remembered, and the sudden loudness of the final stroke told for death that surprised in the midst of life, Clarissa falling where she stood in her drawing-room. No, no, he cried, she is not dead. I am not old, he cried, and marched up Whitehall as if there rolled down to him, vigorous, unending, his future. He was not old, or set, or dried in the least. As for caring what they said of him, the Dalloways, the Whitbreads and their set, he cared not a straw, not a straw. Though it was true he would have, some time or other, to see whether Richard couldn't help him to some job. Striding, staring, he glared at the statue of the Duke of Cambridge. He had been sent down from Oxford. True. He had been a socialist, in some sense a failure. True. Still, the future of civilization lies, he thought, in the hands of young men like that, of young men such as he was 30 years ago, with their love of abstract principles, getting books sent out to them all the way from London to a peak in the Himalayas, reading science, reading philosophy. The future lies in the hands of young men like that, he thought. A patter like the patter of leaves in a wood came from behind, and with it a rustling, regular thudding sound, which as it overtook him drummed his thoughts, strict in step, up Whitehall, without his doing. Boys in uniform, carrying guns, marched with their eyes ahead of them, marched, their arms stiff, and on their faces an expression like the letters of a legend written round the base of a statue praising duty, gratitude, fidelity, love of England. It is, thought Peter Walsh, beginning to keep step with them, a very fine training. But they did not look robust. They were weedy for the most part, boys of 16, who might tomorrow stand behind bowls of rice, cakes of soap on counters. Now they wore on them, unmixed with sensual pleasure or daily preoccupations, the solemnity of the wreath which they had fetched from Finsbury pavement to the empty tomb. They had taken their vow. The traffic respected it. Vans were stopped. I can't keep up with them, Peter Walsh thought, as they marched up Whitehall, and sure enough, on they marched, past him, past everyone, in their steady way, as if one will worked legs and arms uniformly, and life, with its varieties, its irreticences, had been laid under a pavement of monuments and wreaths and drugged into a stiff yet staring corpse by discipline. One had to respect it. One might laugh, but one had to respect it, he thought. There they go, thought Peter Walsh, pausing at the edge of the pavement, and all the exalted statues, Nelson, Gordon, Havelock, the Black, the spectacular images of great soldiers stood looking ahead of them, as if they too had made the same renunciation. Peter Walsh felt he too had made it, the great renunciation, trampled under the same temptations, and achieved at length a marble stare. But the stare Peter Walsh did not want for himself in the least, though he could respect it in others. He could respect it in boys. They don't know the troubles of the flesh yet, he thought, as the marching boys disappeared in the direction of the Strand. All that I've been through, he thought, crossing the road and standing under Gordon's statue. Gordon, whom as a boy he had worshipped. Gordon standing lonely with one leg raised and his arms crossed. Poor Gordon, he thought. And just because nobody yet knew he was in London, except Clarissa, and the earth, after the voyage, still seemed an island to him, the strangeness of standing alone, alive, unknown, at 11:30 in Trafalgar Square overcame him. What is it? Where am I? And why, after all, does one do it, he thought, the divorce seeming all moonshine. And down his mind went flat as a marsh, and three great emotions bowled over him: understanding, a vast philanthropy, and finally, as if the result of the others, an irrepressible, exquisite delight, as if inside his brain by another hand strings were pulled, shutters moved, and he, having nothing to do with it, yet stood at the opening of endless avenues, down which if he chose he might wander. He had not felt so young for years.
Section 9. He had escaped, was utterly free, as happens in the downfall of habit when the mind, like an unguarded flame, bows and bends and seems to blow from its holding. I haven't felt so young for years, thought Peter, escaping, only of course for an hour or so, from being precisely what he was, and feeling like a child who runs out of doors and sees, as he runs, his old nurse waving at the wrong window. But she's extraordinarily attractive, he thought, as walking across Trafalgar Square in the direction of the Haymarket came a young woman who, as she passed Gordon's statue, seemed, Peter Walsh thought, susceptible as he was, to shed veil after veil, until she became the very woman he had always had in mind, young but stately, merry but discreet, black but enchanting. Straightening himself and stealthily fingering his pocket-knife, he started after her to follow this woman, this excitement, which seemed, even with its back turned, to shed on him a light which connected them, which singled him out, as if the random uproar of the traffic had whispered through hollowed hands his name, not Peter, but his private name which he called himself in his own thoughts. You, she said, only you, saying it with her white gloves and her shoulders. Then the thin, long cloak which the wind stirred as she walked past Dent's shop in Cockspur Street blew out with an enveloping kindness, a mournful tenderness, as of arms that would open and take the tired. But she's not married, she's young, quite young, thought Peter. The red carnation he had seen her wear as she came across Trafalgar Square burning again in his eyes and making her lips red. But she waited at the curbstone. There was a dignity about her. She was not worldly like Clarissa, not rich like Clarissa. Was she, he wondered as she moved, respectable? Witty, with a lizard's flickering tongue, he thought. For one must invent, must allow oneself a little diversion. A cool, waiting wit, a darting wit, not noisy. She moved, she crossed. He followed her. To embarrass her was the last thing he wished. Still, if she stopped, he would say, "Come and have an ice," he would say, and she would answer, perfectly simply, "Oh, yes." But other people got between them in the street, obstructing him, blotting her out. He pursued, she changed. There was colour in her cheeks, mockery in her eyes. He was an adventurer, reckless, he thought, swift, daring, indeed, landed as he was last night from India. A romantic buccaneer, careless of all these damned proprieties, yellow dressing gowns, pipes, fishing rods in the shop windows, and respectability and evening parties and spruce old men wearing white slips beneath their waistcoats. He was a buccaneer, On and on she went, across Piccadilly and up Regent Street, ahead of him, her cloak, her gloves, her shoulders combining with the fringes and the laces and the feather boas in the windows to make the spirit of finery and whimsy which dwindled out of the shops onto the pavement, as the light of a lamp goes wavering at night over hedges in the darkness. Laughing and delightful, she had crossed Oxford Street and Great Portland Street and turned down one of the little streets, and now, the great moment was approaching, for now she slackened, opened her bag, and with one look in his direction, but not at him, one look that bade farewell, summed up the whole situation and dismissed it triumphantly, forever, had fitted her key, opened the door, and gone. Clarissa's voice saying, remember my party, sang in his ears. The house was one of those flat red houses with hanging flower baskets of vague impropriety. It was over. Well, I've had my fun. I've had it, he thought, looking up at the swinging baskets of pale geraniums, and it was smashed to atoms. His fun, for it was half made up, as he knew very well, invented, this escapade with the girl, made up as one makes up the better part of life, he thought, making oneself up, making her up, creating an exquisite amusement and something more. But odd it was, and quite true, all this one could never share. It smashed to atoms. He turned, went up the street, thinking to find somewhere to sit, till it was time for Lincoln's Inn, for Messrs. Hooper and Greatley. Where should he go? No matter. Up the street, then, towards Regent's Park. His boots on the pavement struck out, no matter, for it was early, still very early. It was a splendid morning, too. Like the pulse of a perfect heart, life struck straight through the streets. There was no fumbling, no hesitation. Sweeping and swerving accurately, punctually, noiselessly, there, precisely at the right instant, the motor car stopped at the door. The girl, silk-stockinged, feathered, evanescent, but not to him particularly attractive, for he had had his fling, alighted. Admirable butlers, tawny chow dogs, halls laid in black and white lozenges with white blinds blowing, Peter saw through the opened door and approved of. A splendid achievement in its own way, after all, London, the season, civilization, coming as he did from a respectable Anglo-Indian family which for at least 3 generations had administered the affairs of a continent. It's strange, he thought, what a sentiment I have about that, disliking India and empire and army as he did. There were moments when civilization, even of this sort, seemed dear to him as a personal possession. Moments of pride in England, in butlers, chow dogs, girls in their security. Ridiculous enough, still there it is, he thought. And the doctors and men of business, and capable women all going about their business, punctual, alert, robust, seemed to him wholly admirable, good fellows, to whom one would entrust one's life, companions in the art of living who would see one through. What with one thing and another, the show was really very tolerable, and he would sit down in the shade and smoke. There was Regent's Park, yes. As a child he had walked in Regent's Park. Odd, he thought, how the thought of childhood keeps coming back to me, the result of seeing Clarissa, perhaps, for women live much more in the past than we do, he thought. They attach themselves to places, and their fathers. A woman's always proud of her father. Burton was a nice place, a very nice place, but I could never get on with the old man, he thought. There was quite a scene one night, an argument about something or other, what he could not remember. Politics, presumably. Yes, he remembered Regent's Park, the long straight walk, the little house where one bought air-balls to the left, an absurd statue with an inscription somewhere or other. He looked for an empty seat. He did not want to be bothered, feeling a little drowsy as he did, by people asking him the time. An elderly grey nurse with a baby asleep in its perambulator, that was the best he could do for himself, sit down at the far end of the seat by that nurse. She's a queer-looking girl, he thought, suddenly remembering Elizabeth as she came into the room and stood by her mother. Grown big, quite grown up, not exactly pretty, handsome rather, and she can't be more than 18. Probably she doesn't get on with Clarissa. There's my Elizabeth, that sort of thing. Why not his Elizabeth, simply? Trying to make out, like most mothers, that things are what they're not. She trusts to her charm too much, he thought. She overdoes it. The rich, benignant cigar smoke eddied coolly down his throat. He puffed it out again in rings which breasted the air bravely for a moment, blue, circular. I shall try and get a word alone with Elizabeth tonight, he thought, then began to wobble into hourglass shapes and taper away. Odd shapes they take, he thought. Suddenly he closed his eyes, raised his hand with an effort, and threw away the heavy end of his cigar. A great brush swept smooth across his mind, sweeping across it moving branches, children's voices, the shuffle of feet, and people passing, and humming traffic, rising and falling traffic. Down, down he sank into the plumes and feathers of sleep, sank and was muffled over. The grey nurse resumed her knitting as Peter Walsh, on the hot seat beside her, began snoring. In her grey dress, moving her hands indefatigably yet quietly, she seemed like the champion of the rights of sleepers, like one of those spectral presences which rise in twilight in woods made of sky and branches. The solitary traveller, haunter of lanes, disturber of ferns, and devastator of great hemlock plants, looking up, suddenly sees the giant figure at the end of the ride. By conviction an atheist, perhaps, he is taken by surprise with moments of extraordinary exultation. Nothing exists outside us except a state of mind, he thinks, a desire for solace, for relief, for something outside these miserable pygmies, these feeble, these ugly, these craven men and women. But if he can conceive of her, then in some sort she exists, he thinks, and advancing down the path with his eyes upon sky and branches, he rapidly endows them with womanhood, sees with amazement how grave they become, how majestically, as the breeze stirs them, they dispense with a dark flutter of the leaves charity, comprehension, absolution, and then, flinging themselves suddenly aloft, confound the piety of their aspect with the wild carouse. Such are the visions which proffer great cornucopias full of fruit to the solitary traveller, or murmur in his ear like sirens lolloping away on the green sea waves, or are dashed in his face like bunches of roses, or rise to the surface like pale faces, which fishermen flounder through floods to embrace. Such are the visions which ceaselessly float up, pace beside, put their faces in front of, the actual thing, often overpowering the solitary traveller and taking away from him the sense of the earth, the wish to return, and giving him for substitute a general peace, as if, so he thinks as he advances down the forest ride, all this fever of living was simplicity itself, and myriads of things merged in one thing, and this figure, made of sky and branches as it is, had risen from the troubled sea. He is elderly, past 50 now, as a shape might be sucked up out of the waves to shower down from her magnificent hands compassion, comprehension, absolution. So, he thinks, may I never go back to the lamplight, to the sitting-room, never finish my book, never knock out my pipe, never ring for Mrs. Turner to clear away, rather let me walk straight on to this great figure, who will, with a toss of her head, mount me on her streamers and let me blow to nothingness with the rest. Such are the visions. The solitary traveller is soon beyond the wood, and there, coming to the door with shaded eyes, possibly to look for his return, with hands raised, with white apron blowing, is an elderly woman who seems, so powerful is this infirmity, to seek, over a desert, a lost son, to search for a rider destroyed, to be the figure of the mother whose sons have been killed in the battles of the world. So, as the solitary traveller advances down the village street where the women stand knitting and the men dig in the garden, the evening seems ominous, the figures still, as if some august fate, known to them, awaited without fear, were about to sweep them into complete annihilation. Indoors, among ordinary things, the cupboard, the table, the window-sill with its geraniums, suddenly the outline of the landlady, bending to remove the cloth, becomes soft with light. An adorable emblem, which only the recollection of cold human contacts forbids us to embrace. She takes the marmalade. She shuts it in the cupboard. There is nothing more tonight, sir? But to whom does the solitary traveller make reply? Section 10. So the elderly nurse knitted over the sleeping baby in Regent's Park. So Peter Walsh snored. He woke with extreme suddenness, saying to himself, "The death of the soul." "Lord, Lord," he said to himself out loud, stretching and opening his eyes. "The death of the soul." The words attached themselves to some scene, to some room, to some past he had been dreaming of. It became clearer, the scene, the room, the past he had been dreaming of. It was at Burton that summer, early in the 90s, when he was so passionately in love with Clarissa. There were a great many people there, laughing and talking, sitting round a table after tea, and the room was bathed in yellow light and full of cigarette smoke. They were talking about a man who had married his housemaid, one of the neighbouring squires. He had forgotten his name. He had married his housemaid and she had been brought to Burton to call. An awful visit it had been. She was absurdly overdressed, like a cockatoo, Clarissa had said, imitating her, and she never stopped talking. On and on she went, on and on, Clarissa imitated her. Then somebody said, Sally Seton it was, did it make any real difference to one's feelings to know that before they'd married she had had a baby? In those days, in mixed company, it was a bold thing to say. He could see Clarissa now turning bright pink, somehow contracting and saying, "Oh, I shall never be able to speak to her again," whereupon the whole party sitting round the tea table seemed to wobble. It was very uncomfortable. He hadn't blamed her for minding the fact, since in those days a girl brought up as she was knew nothing, but it was her manner that annoyed him. Timid, hard, something arrogant, unimaginative, prudish. The death of the soul. He had said that instinctively, ticketing the moment as he used to do. The death of her soul. Everyone wobbled. Everyone seemed to bow as she spoke, and then to stand up different. He could see Sally Seton, like a child who has been in mischief, leaning forward, rather flushed, wanting to talk, but afraid, and Clarissa did frighten people. She was Clarissa's greatest friend, always about the place, totally unlike her, an attractive creature, handsome, dark, with a reputation in those days of great daring, and he used to give her cigars, which she smoked in her bedroom. She had either been engaged to somebody or quarrelled with her family, and old Parry disliked them both equally, which was a great bond. Then Clarissa, still with an air of being offended with them all, got up, made some excuse and went off alone. As she opened the door, in came that great shaggy dog which ran after sheep. She flung herself upon him, went into raptures. It was as if she said to Peter, it was all aimed at him, he knew, "I know you thought me absurd about that woman just now, but see how extraordinarily sympathetic I am. See how I love my Rob." They had always had this queer power of communicating without words. She knew directly he criticised her. Then she would do something quite obvious to defend herself, like this fuss with the dog, but it never took him in. He always saw through Clarissa. Not that he said anything, of course, just sat looking glum. It was the way their quarrels often began. She shut the door. At once he became extremely depressed. It all seemed useless, going on being in love, going on quarrelling, going on making it up, and he wandered off alone among outhouses, stables, looking at the horses. The place was quite a humble one. The Parrys were never very well off. But there were always grooms and stable boys about. Clarissa loved riding, and an old coachman. What was his name? An old nurse, old Moody, old Goody, some such name they called her, whom one was taken to visit in a little room with lots of photographs, lots of bird cages. It was an awful evening. He grew more and more gloomy. Not about that only, about everything. And he couldn't see her, couldn't explain to her, couldn't have it out. There were always people about. She'd go on as if nothing had happened. That was the devilish part of her, this coldness, this woodenness, something very profound in her, which he had felt again this morning talking to her, an impenetrability. Yet heaven knows he loved her. She had some queer power of fiddling on one's nerves, turning one's nerves to fiddle strings, yes. He had gone into dinner rather late from some idiotic idea of making himself felt, and had sat down by old Miss Parry, Aunt Helena, Mr. Parry's sister, who was supposed to preside. There she sat in her white cashmere shawl with her head against the window, a formidable old lady, but kind to him, for he had found her some rare flower, and she was a great botanist, marching off in thick boots with a black collecting box slung between her shoulders. He sat down beside her and couldn't speak. Everything seemed to race past him. He just sat there eating. And then, halfway through dinner, he made himself look across at Clarissa for the first time. She was talking to a young man on her right. He had a sudden revelation. She will marry that man, he said to himself. He didn't even know his name. For of course it was that afternoon, that very afternoon, that Dalloway had come over. And Clarissa called him Wickham. That was the beginning of it all. Somebody had brought him over, and Clarissa got his name wrong. She introduced him to everybody as Wickham. At last he said, "My name is Dalloway." That was his first view of Richard, a fair young man, rather awkward, sitting on a deck chair and blurting out, "My name is Dalloway." Sally got hold of it. Always after that she called him, "My name is Dalloway." He was a prey to revelations at that time. This one, that she would marry Dalloway, was blinding, overwhelming at the moment. There was a sort of, how could he put it, a sort of ease in her manner to him, something maternal, something gentle. They were talking about politics. All through dinner he tried to hear what they were saying. Afterwards he could remember standing by old Miss Parry's chair in the drawing-room. Clarissa came up with her perfect manners like a real hostess and wanted to introduce him to someone, spoke as if they had never met before, which enraged him. Yet even then he admired her for it. He admired her courage, her social instinct. He admired her power of carrying things through. "The perfect hostess," he said to her, whereupon she winced all over. But he meant her to feel it. He would have done anything to hurt her after seeing her with Dalloway. So she left him. And he had a feeling that they were all gathered together in a conspiracy against him, laughing and talking behind his back. There he stood by Miss Parry's chair as though he had been cut out of wood, he talking about wildflowers. Never, never had he suffered so infernally. He must have forgotten even to pretend to listen. At last he woke up. He saw Miss Parry looking rather disturbed, rather indignant, with her prominent eyes fixed. He almost cried out that he couldn't attend because he was in hell. People began going out of the room. He heard them talking about fetching cloaks, about its being cold on the water, and so on. They were going boating on the lake by moonlight, one of Sally's mad ideas. He could hear her describing the moon, and they all went out. He was left quite alone. "Don't you want to go with them?" said Aunt Helena, old Miss Parry. She had guessed. And he turned round, and there was Clarissa again. She had come back to fetch him. He was overcome by her generosity, her goodness. "Come along," she said. "They're waiting." He had never felt so happy in the whole of his life. Without a word they made it up. They walked down to the lake. He had 20 minutes of perfect happiness. Her voice, her laugh, her dress, something floating, white, crimson. Her spirit, her adventurousness. She made them all disembark and explore the island. She startled a hen. She laughed. She sang. And all the time he knew perfectly well Dalloway was falling in love with her. She was falling in love with Dalloway. But it didn't seem to matter. Nothing mattered. They sat on the ground and talked, he and Clarissa. They went in and out of each other's minds without any effort. And then in a second it was over. He said to himself as they were getting into the boat, "She will marry that man," dully, without any resentment. But it was an obvious thing. Dalloway would marry Clarissa. Dalloway rowed them in. He said nothing. But somehow, as they watched him start, jumping onto his bicycle to ride 20 miles through the woods, wobbling off down the drive, waving his hand and disappearing, he obviously did feel, instinctively, tremendously, strongly, all that. The night, the romance, Clarissa. He deserved to have her. For himself, he was absurd. His demands upon Clarissa, he could see it now, were absurd. He asked impossible things. He made terrible scenes. She would have accepted him still, perhaps, if he had been less absurd. Sally thought so. She wrote him all that summer long letters, how they had talked of him, how she had praised him, how Clarissa burst into tears. It was an extraordinary summer, all letters, scenes, telegrams, arriving at Burton early in the morning, hanging about till the servants were up, appalling tete-a-tetes with old Mr. Parry at breakfast, Aunt Helena formidable but kind, Sally sweeping him off for talks in the vegetable garden, Clarissa in bed with headaches. The final scene, the terrible scene which he believed had mattered more than anything in the whole of his life, it might be an exaggeration, but still so it did seem now, happened at 3 o'clock in the afternoon of a very hot day. It was a trifle that led up to it. Sally at lunch saying something about Dalloway and calling him, "My name is Dalloway," whereupon Clarissa suddenly stiffened, coloured, in a way she had, and rapped out sharply, "We've had enough of that feeble joke." That was all. But for him it was precisely as if she had said, "I'm only amusing myself with you. I've an understanding with Richard Dalloway." So he took it. He had not slept for nights. "It's got to be finished one way or the other," he said to himself. He sent a note to her by Sally asking her to meet him by the fountain at 3. "Something very important has happened," he scribbled at the end of it. The fountain was in the middle of a little shrubbery, far from the house, with shrubs and trees all round it. There she came, even before the time, and they stood with the fountain between them, the spout, it was broken, dribbling water incessantly. How sights fix themselves upon the mind! For example, the vivid green moss. She did not move. "Tell me the truth, tell me the truth," he kept on saying. He felt as if his forehead would burst. She seemed contracted, petrified. She did not move. "Tell me the truth," he repeated, when suddenly that old man Brettkopf popped his head in carrying the Times, stared at them, gaped, and went away. They neither of them moved. "Tell me the truth," he repeated. He felt that he was grinding against something physically hard. She was unyielding. She was like iron, like flint, rigid up the backbone. And when she said, "It's no use, it's no use, this is the end," after he had spoken for hours, it seemed, with the tears running down his cheeks, it was as if she had hit him in the face. She turned, she left him, went away. "Clarissa!" he cried. "Clarissa!" But she never came back. It was over. He went away that night. He never saw her again.